Education England about 3 years ago, and I was part of the team that put together the MSK framework for first contact practitioners in primary care. So I worked a lot on that particular framework, and then since then I've been working on the advanced practice piece for Health Education England. So I lead the Centre for Advancing Practice. What I'm going to do is walk you through some of the functions of the centre, what it's doing. It's a very new construct. We're not fully up and functioning at this point in time, but I can tell you what we are doing and some things about our plans going forward. So I'm happy to share these slides with you afterwards, so that's not a problem. And as Amanda said, if you've got any questions, if you want to pop them in the chat box, I'll deal with questions at the end, if that's okay. Health Education to set up a for advancing practice. We are part of Health Education England, which is part of the NHS. So we sit within Health Education England, and we were asked to set standards for advanced level practice education. And these standards are based on the 2017 MSK, sorry, the 27 ACP framework that Health Education produced and published in 2017. So we were asked to set standards for advanced level practice education and training, and building on that framework, we developed a set of standards. You may be familiar with standards of education and training sets. So we developed standards for advanced practice education. We were asked to accredit programs that meet and maintain standards. So those are programs that map fully to the ACP framework and to the standards that we wrote. To quality monitor those the multi-professional advanced practice education and training. So that's about programs. We're also asked to support and recognise individuals, so that's registered health and care professionals working at or towards advanced or consultant level practice. To promote public and peer confidence in advanced practice in consistent, robust and transparent ways, and to maintain a public directory of registered health and care professionals who demonstrate and maintain the standards and accredit education providers. So there's quite a lot in there. It's all about setting standards. So Health Education England's role is workforce, the skill mix of the workforce, the training of the workforce in the NHS and beyond. We're NHS England, but we are looking at to what extent we have a 4 nations reach. So we are in conversations with Scotland, Ireland and Wales about to what extent the plans that we're putting in place align with their plans. And actually we have to admit that the 2017 ACP framework was stolen from the work that was done in Scotland and Wales and Ireland. So we mercilessly plagiarised their work and turned it into a multi-profession framework, and which we say that to them every time we meet them. So we're working predominantly in England, but we believe that we have a reach beyond England. We also have a reach beyond the NHS, because a lot of what we're doing, as you'll realise today, is about primary care, but it's about setting standards for advanced practice in other individuals' work. In my world, there's about 26 different professions that are working at or towards advanced level, or who believe they are working at or towards advanced level. And there's a number of non-statutory registered professions as well that feel that they are, by dint of the fact that they were not deemed to be eligible for a statutory registration when they were formed, also believe that they're working at advanced level. And I think so there's quite a lot of work going on around their needs. And when I take you through some of the functions of the centre, you'll see a little bit more about what I'm talking about. So there's some policy drivers that drive our work. HE mandate 2019-2020 included the need to develop a more flexible workforce, enable people to develop new skills over the course of their career, enabling people to maximise professional competencies, including through advanced clinical practice. Now, one of the issues about advanced clinical practice is that it's not regulated. There's some individuals that believe it should be regulated. The NMC and the HCPC are currently looking at whether it should be regulated or not. They're working in conjunction with us and other professionals as well to decide whether it's necessary to regulate advanced clinical practice. One of the problems that's identified from service is the standard of defining whether somebody is at advanced clinical practice level or not is very challenging. The application of the 2017 framework is open to individual employer and individual university interpretation, which is one of the reasons why we were asked to set some standards and to come in and to accredit programs and to recognise people. But it's also about enabling the workforce to maximise professional competencies by looking at the standards for advanced practice programs and recognising individuals that I mentioned that, developing national accredited education and training standards for practice programs for HEIs, and the FCP work falls under that umbrella, and commissioning and validating multi-professional credentials. Now, credentials in this context are units of learning which are deemed to be useful to the system. And again, you might say that the FCP modules that are being developed fall into that category as well. We've been asked to put some processes in place for validating multi-professional credentials. The people plan for 2021 mentioned specifically advanced clinical practice with a request to train a further 400. It was 1,000 originally, and then COVID came along and upset the apple cart. We will be asked probably to support the training of 1,000 additional 1,000 in 21, 22 and beyond. So there's a big push in the people plan for advanced practice, for the recognition of advanced practice and for the recognition of advanced practice training, particularly around innovative roles, but also picking up on areas of practice such as mental health, cancer, and developing clinical pharmacists. So there's quite a lot of work, and it's a very broad remit that we have. In terms of the structure for the centre, it doesn't exist in a physical sense. It has a lot of people working in it. But as I said before, we sit within Health Education England, specifically within the Department of Education and Quality. And I just wanted to briefly take you through some of the structural components of the centre. So we've created a strategic oversight group. This is a group of people with a strategic vision about how the NHS will work, how practice will develop. It includes employers, it includes leaders, it includes patient or citizens representatives. We have representatives from Citizens Group, Patient Advisory Forum, works closely with HEE and provides input into almost everything we do. That strategic oversight group will receive direction from HEE and the government about the direction of travel, but it'll also receive information about what's going on in the regions and from other stakeholder groups. So the little peach coloured block in the middle there represents some of the inputs into the strategic oversight group, but also that's going up and coming down into the groups below it. Part of our work is to set up 7 in regional faculties, so a regional faculty of advancing practice in each of the new 7 regions, and then those faculties are in the process of appointing regional leads. So in each of your regions, you will see a new faculty emerging, and try and find out what they're up to. They will have a remit of delivery of the advanced clinical practice agenda at a regional level, but also feeding into the strategic oversight group at national level about what's going on in the regions and about how we're going to deliver at a national and beyond in terms of the ACP agenda. We have a large number of stakeholder groups, including the patient forum, all sorts of representatives from the professional bodies, from the regulators. And I just wanted to make you aware that we meet with the professional bodies on a regular basis. We have an ongoing dialogue with the regulators because they're very important to appraise them of what we're doing. If you draw a Venn diagram of what the professional bodies do, what Health Education England does, and what the regulators do, you will realise there's some overlap, but there's also distinct clear water between what we do. As I said, Health Education England's remit is the workforce, the workforce skill mix, and we're predominantly, our responsibility is quality assuring education and training. We clearly don't have a role in fitness to practice. That's the remit of the regulator, the individual, and the employer. And so we have a dividing line between what we do and what the regulators do and what the professional bodies do. But we do meet with them on a regular basis just to ensure that they are aware of what we're doing, and so we can have an ongoing dialogue. We also have a program or centre management group that manages the whole of this construct. That red block below those three groups represents our education, development and assurance group. So this is a group that's made up of HEE and external people. It's actually two groups, one that looks after educational development and one that looks after assurance. And the assurance group is the group that signs off program accreditation, the recognition of individuals and the credentials. And then below that, we've got 5 groups: education and workforce group, credential group, research group, portfolio group, and accreditation group. And I'm just going to walk you through a little bit about those 5 groups in due course. Somebody's got their microphone on, and there's sort of some interesting noises. That's better. Thank you. Yeah, so when I talk about these little grey individual groups of people working on various projects for Health Education England, we're using individuals from the HEI sector, and I should also mention in our stakeholder group up there that we have a regular liaison with groups such as API, the Council for Health, and the HEIs. But on the groups at the bottom there, we have representatives from appropriate individual stakeholder groups. So I think what I'm trying to represent here is that up at the top of that chart, it's very strategic, and at the bottom, it's much more operational. So I'm just going to talk you through some of the activities of these various groups. So the Education and Workforce Development Group. So the consultant framework is about, well, it's you can find it on HEE's website if you search for consultant framework. We're currently undertaking a piece of work to ensure the alignment between the consultant framework and the advanced level framework. And in due course, we will develop the enhanced level framework. So that's the enhanced level sits below the advanced, and the advanced sits below the consultant if you're looking at it in a hierarchical way. What we're trying to achieve is coherence between the 3 levels, so individuals will see themselves moving between the various levels. The enhanced level could be the sort of level which aligns very well with the FCP work that Amanda and Julia are doing. So that gives you some sort of sense of where it sits. It's all within this umbrella, if that's the right word, of advanced practice, because that's what we are. We're a centre for advancing practice. We're trying to promote the nature of advancing practice and advanced practice in all its guises. I mentioned at the start the group of non-statutory registered professions, and we're working to see to what extent they could be included or not, as the case may be. But we've also got work around leadership, some work around the educational component. So you'll be aware that the Advanced Clinical Practice Framework has got these 4 pillars. My own preference is not to refer to them as pillars. I'm much more comfortable with the notion of them being elements of advanced practice. And the thing about elements is they combine to produce other things. And we're very much moving towards the notion of an integrated approach and how the elements of advanced practice work together. So although we've, and I'll come to a slide in a minute about the research work we're doing, when I talk about research, leadership, education and practice, that we don't view them as siloed bits of work. They absolutely have to work together for the good of the workforce and the good of the safety of the population. In terms of credentials, so an odd word, but we've been asked to develop a lot of credentials. We've got 30 of them in development at the moment. You can again go onto HEE's website and look at those, what sort of credentials are being developed. But essentially, they're units of learning. They could be large units of learning. Some of the learning is kind of, there's another microphone on. Thank you. Some of these are large units of learning up to PG Cert size, and some are very small, 6 hours of online learning. So it could be any size and delivered in a number of formats. The thing is that we're trying to get the individual groups that are developing these credentials. And those of you from the HEI background will recognise the process. It's a little bit like developing a module. You'll go through the due diligence and process of developing, undertaking the discovery of what's out there already, what frameworks exist already, what evidence and research has been done, and you'll put that together into a curriculum. A syllabus, depending on how you use the term syllabus and curriculum, but you'll put it together in terms of a block of learning. Our role in this is that we will validate the credential, because we're commissioning them. We will want to understand that the credential, the bit of learning, meets our requirements, but it will be delivered by an HEI or another education provider that will award the appropriate bit of learning. So if it's a 20M level credits, then the HEI will deliver that. And it could be that the FCP modules that you're developing fit into this kind of model, that although this would be reverse engineering, we would wish to perhaps accredit or validate the learning that's being suggested or delivered by your HEIs. As I said, this is work that's ongoing. We need to work a little bit more about what that process will look like. In terms of research, we've got a lot of research going on at the moment. We put quite a bit of money into evaluating what we're doing. So we've asked Nottingham University to effectively evaluate what we're doing as a piece of action research, particularly because we are interested in how we're developing the centre and whether it's actually achieving what we set out to achieve, which ultimately is about improving patient safety. And there's a number of projects underway. You can see those on the screen. And there's a paper being produced, so that link does work. Takes you to the BMJ online paper, and there's other papers being produced about advanced. You'll notice at the bottom there we're working with groups like ARChem and FICM. They're not identified there, but they're another of our stakeholder group, because individuals going through ACCP or ARChem training programs align very closely with the ACP framework, and we're looking for a mechanism whereby we would recognise individuals that had gone through one training program as being equivalent to going through an ACP training program for the purposes of being recognised by the centre. So that's just a flavour of the research. I mentioned at the start we were asked to develop a directory, so this will be a public-facing directory onto which individuals will be able to be if they are. There are two mechanisms of being recognised by the centre, either by submitting a portfolio of evidence or by successful completion of an accredited programme. Those programmes will largely be delivered by education providers or professional bodies or the regional faculties I mentioned before. So the HEI sector may not have the monopoly over this forever, because there are lots of other individual groups stepping into the space and saying, well, why would you not recognise the training that that's happened in another particular education provider? So the directory it will list those individuals that have been recognised by the centre, meeting the necessary requirements, either at enhanced level in the future, but when it goes live, which will probably be after Christmas in the new year, it will be a directory of those individuals that have either successfully completed an accredited HEI programme at the moment, as I mentioned a minute ago, or that successfully completed the portfolio route. Now, the portfolio route is accessible through a portal that we've designed. So again, that will go live on HEE's website. So the portal gives you access to the portfolio. You complete the portfolio, or you submit your evidence that you've successfully completed one of our accredited programs, and that will take you onto the directory. You can't so this will become obvious when it's up and running, hopefully. The directory itself will eventually include consultants in the enhanced and the FCP levels, as Amanda will talk about in due course. Programme accreditation, well, we paused that in March due to the pandemic, but we started that again in the first. And for existing programmes, so these are HEIs in England that are running ACP programmes at the moment. We think there are probably around 88 universities that are running advanced clinical practice programmes in England. There could well be close to 200 individual programs. Some HEIs, one HEI has got, I think, 16 programs running within it. So that's 8 apprenticeships and 8 non-apprenticeship MScs with advanced clinical practice in the title. So there's quite a lot of programs out there to accredit, and we're having to book them in ahead of time so that they can get their paperwork ahead in preparation. Once we clear the backlog of existing programs, we'll move on to new programs. And just to give you a bit of information, the regional ACP leads that I mentioned earlier and the regional quality teams are asked to approve or comment on the submission of the programs as they come in, because we want to involve the regions closely in the accreditation programs. So I'm happy to take any questions at this point, if that's okay. I should stop sharing my screen. And I don't know how you want to do this, Amanda. Is it?
So, there's a couple just in the chat box to begin with, Richard. So if anybody wants to put some more questions that they're thinking of in the chat, I think it's probably the easiest way to do this. So Richard, the first question that we've got here is, how are you currently promoting advanced practice to the public?
Good question. We've actually got our comms people doing several bits of communication work to do this, and the public are the next group that are going to be we're going to promote advanced practice too. It's a lot of work with the patient groups now, and we've spent a bit of time working with them to try and find out what it is that they feel the public need to know. It's an interesting debate. Within advanced practice, you'll realise that there are some people that love the title advanced clinical practitioner. They believe that should be the title. There are other people that feel that that's not very helpful because they feel it's important that the base profession is what people should be using. The patient group feel very strongly that they would rather people stand up and say, "Good morning, my name's Richard, I'm a physiotherapist," and not hide behind any other title. And there are equally a number of people that think that I should be standing up and saying, "My name's Richard, I'm an advanced clinical practitioner." So there's some interesting messaging going on out there about what it is that we should be saying. But we will definitely be promoting advanced practice through this particular project that's going to be starting after Christmas.
Fab, thank you, Richard. Can I just ask one from John Evans? He wants to know, how do HEIs apply for accreditation?
They go on to HEE's website section, so HEE, going to the advanced practice component, and there's a great big section there about program accreditation, which takes you through all the stages where you can download all of the paperwork. I'm working on a fancier portal for program accreditation submission. At the moment, it's a matter of sending in the completed documents. You'll all be familiar with this process because you'll have all gone through it through validation and accreditations with other organisations. But I think we think we can automate the process quite significantly. Oh, Sarah Goodhue, thank you, Sarah, has put up a link. Fabulous.
She's handy, that Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Saying here from earlier on, there was a question asking about consultant framework.
Yep.
Will the consultant framework and standards require HEI course input?
Well, I think that there'll still be 2 routes. There'll be a portfolio route and there will be an HEI route. So or a talk route, if that's the perhaps better phrase. So I think the answer to that is yes. We're not going to be. The process is that you need to map to in this case, the consultant framework, and you need to provide evidence. So either through the portfolio that you've got already, which will include a lot of the work that you've done at an advanced level, through a talk component, or a hybrid of the 2.
Perfect, thank you. And we'll just have one more question in the chat box here, and it says, Jenny says, You've mentioned multi-professional throughout, but will you expect to accept advanced practice programs in the centre that are uni-professional if they have 4 elements at level 7?
Yes. So at the moment, we're going through a transition phase. I have to acknowledge that most of the HEIs developed uni-professional programs, so that won't be a penalty. But what we would expect that program to do is to demonstrate how in future they would map to the multi-professional framework. Now, multi-professional means more than one. And I think it's a debate that we need to have about what constitutes multi-professional. So, and I think it's the program submitting for accreditation at the moment are addressing that. But I think it's not our aim to say that you can't be accredited if you are absolutely uni-professional. But it's what measures might you be taking in the future, because we're accrediting programs in the middle of their validation cycle. So it would be quite unrealistic for HEE to say to a program, you've got to revalidate because you're not multi-professional. What we might expect you to do is next time you revalidate, address the something about the multi-professional agenda.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think what we'll do now is we'll liberate some time for Richard, because I know he's a very busy man and he's got a really rather busy afternoon packed full of things to do. So thank you very much for your questions, and for those in the chat box, keep putting them in the chat box, because we will collate this into a Q&A afterwards so that we can send it back round to all this group so that you have all the information. Thank you very much, Richard.
Okay, thank you. And if you want to send me any questions, Amanda, do so, but I'll take off now if I may.
That's great, you can. Thank you very much for your time, Richard. So I'm now going to introduce to you Tim Noblett, who is going to be talking about the knowledge, skills and attributes document and how this fits, what the background is, how it was made up, and how it all fits into the courses that you will be developing. So I've now got to choose which is the correct presentation now, so bear with me, it might be the wrong one because they all say HEI presentation. Oh, brilliant, how about that? It's the right one first time, miracle. Okay, is that right, Tim? Should take it away, just tell me when you need the slides changing.
Yeah, great. So thanks for joining, everyone. I know there are a range of professions being represented from the HEIs today. So to bear in mind, this is a journey that started off with musculoskeletal physiotherapy, but now crosses the multi-professions providing musculoskeletal care. However, the framework that's been developed can be used and will be used and is being used by all the professions across the different specialties. So bear in mind that this is MSK, but you can always kind of be thinking, oh, how does this affect me in my specialty as I talk through it? Just to give you a bit of background, in musculoskeletal physiotherapy, we've had advanced practitioners for more than 30 years, and standards were developed for specialisation internationally. So we had variation across the UK of different NHS trusts and private practices and private hospitals using different standards for what constitutes an MSK physiotherapist working at advanced level. And a piece of work was done with the University of Birmingham, Health Education England, Manchester Met and St George's University Hospitals, looking at this variation and looking at actually what MSK, in this case physiotherapy within the research, deemed what we need to do to ensure that we're all coming out at one standard, and that standard wasn't watered down. Other professionals that were coming through and didn't usually work in MSK physiotherapy and MSK in general, to ensure that the standard of advanced practice in MSK remained high and leading the world. So if we just click on to the next slide.
It's not moving. Hang on a minute, sorry.
That's all right. So the next slide is essentially just a picture of the 4 pillars and the framework. And when the framework was published in 2017, we looked at the framework and we thought, actually, internationally, we fit with that framework, and mapping was done to see whether the IFOMP standards, which is the next slides when we eventually go. Do you want me to see if I can?
Yeah, there's something's gone a bit funny on the computer here. Sorry about that, Tim.
Has that worked?
It's not. Bear with me. The joys of PowerPoint, I'm afraid. Sorry. Oh, that's working, Tim.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just get to it. So 2017, loads of chat around the framework, and everyone agreed it's a brilliant piece of work which would bring standards to the same level and standardize the standard, if that makes sense. And what we wanted to ensure was that MSK practice then came underneath one standard of care, so that everyone was learning the same things in many different ways, in many different institutions, but everyone would pop out the same as an MSK practitioner who could work in primary, secondary and tertiary care, and was able to work inpatient and outpatient, and was mobile between private practice, NHS, in any of those providers. I just move. So the international standards for specialisation are written and published by IFOMP, and I think there's 6 universities across the UK that were using those standards to within their master's programs already. They were mapped against the ACP framework, and the ACP framework was seen to be completely encompassed within those standards. But there were some things that weren't specific within the generic standards that were specific within the musculoskeletal standards, and we needed to do something to ensure that those specifics were also rolled out across the UK at the same time. So a piece of work actually started parallel that complemented the first contact practitioner work, where all the special interest groups, and this at the beginning was again just physiotherapy, came together and agreed, yes, we will come together as one group, which became known as the Musculoskeletal Physiotherapy Partnership. That has now expanded to be multi-professional. And we will all come underneath one set of standards. So where standards existed already in the different subspecialties, for example, pain and rheumatology and sports, the Society of Orthopaedic Medicine have their own master's courses, the MACP had different master's courses. They would all look at the standards that they're working on, come together, rewrite some specific standards for musculoskeletal within the UK, and everyone would work to those standards across the professions, but especially within physiotherapy. Those standards have been drafted, well, the first draft has been drafted, and they are now with IFOMP for verification that they cover the IFOMP standards. Then there will be additional bolt-ons put on. So they are a work in progress. They're not quite ready yet. However, when we suddenly knew that we had to get this piece of contact practitioner piece of work done quickly in the wake of COVID happening, because we needed to get bottoms on seats in primary care, we knew that we needed to accelerate the roadmap process so that we could get it out, we could get people trained up, and we can ensure quality standards within these roles. So a committee of us were put together of experts in MSK academia and in clinical practice and policy development, and we started working on the roadmap, which was already ongoing, but we needed to speed the process up. So a group of us were redeployed from our usual jobs and started to work on the roadmap. My team were looking at the standards that needed to be done within musculoskeletal. So we were kind of adopted into the standards that must be there for first contact practitioners. Discussions were then had around, well, hang on, the first contact practitioner is a role, not a standard. So what do we need a first contact practitioner working in musculoskeletal to know? Because they're not treating, they're diagnosing, they're managing, they're referring on for treatment, and they're referring on for expert opinion. So what we did is we looked at the standards that were already out there, and we pulled across any standards that we thought, knowledge, skills and attributes wise, that an MSK practitioner would need to know when going into these roles. We pulled them from the international standards, and we pulled them from other standards that were being used across the United Kingdom. We then took those particular knowledge, skills and attributes back to the committee to say, right, these are the ones that already exist. What else? Here's a list of what else we think needs to go in, but what else do you think needs to go in? And we agreed any additionals. We then took all of those knowledge, skills and attributes back, and we anglified them and primary cared them. So we know that primary care practitioners speak a different language to maybe other sectors, and we made sure that the language was fit for purpose so that anyone working in primary care would understand it. Merged and moved the standards around so that it was nice and condensed as we could get it, and that it would work across the multi-professions. We then sent those back to the committee, who reviewed, and we made some changes based on their feedback. And then we brought the knowledge, skills and attributes back across, and we arranged them underneath the capabilities. So we ended up, we already had the MSK capabilities for primary care. We ended up with knowledge, skills and attributes that sit underneath those capabilities. So if you like, the knowledge, skills and attributes are the academic knowledge, skills and attributes that anyone going into these roles must have. And then the capabilities are their ability to put those knowledge, skills and attributes into practice. That then basically came up with the framework for FCP. So we have the stage 1, where a clinician is working on their knowledge, skills and attributes, and they're getting them signed off. And here today we're here to discuss how that would be done, maybe within an HEI course or program. And that program may be leading onwards to an advanced practice qualification, but it may not. It might be a standalone. That's stage 1. Once they've had that signed off, they can then move forward to applying for an FCP job, start working, and they will be supported through stage 2, which is about the practicalities of putting their knowledge, skills and attributes into practice. And that's supported by supervisors who will go through a supervisory course to ensure that that is happening appropriately within practice. Now, that could be done in a couple of ways too. The universities might choose to support people through stage 1 and stage 2. They might choose to create courses that just provide the knowledge, skills and attributes, and then the individuals can go into practice and be supported by a Health Education England accredited supervisor to do their second stage. I think all of that's up for innovation. I think as long as it's being done at the appropriate level and the centre are happy with it, then any innovation goes. That's why we're all here on this call. The other thing to think about is knowledge, skills and attributes have been developed so that the core capabilities and the core knowledge, skills and attributes can be pulled out. So they are knowledge, skills and attributes that are necessary for any practitioner who's working in first contact. So that could be a nurse, paramedic, physiotherapist, an osteopath, whoever. They've all been pulled out and are common to all of the professions and all of the specialties. The other additional knowledge, skills and attributes and capabilities are those that are specific to that area of practice. So within the musculoskeletal sets, there are set things that are specific to musculoskeletal education and clinical practice. Key thing to remember when looking at the musculoskeletal knowledge, skills and attributes is that they are a subset of what will be the standards for musculoskeletal advanced practice. And those standards are being developed, yes, by the special interest groups, yes, with IFOMT, and yes, with Health Education England, who have worked with the Musculoskeletal Action Group every step of the way. So the standards MSK will be the national standards once they're published and once they're finished. And I think what's important to the HEIs is that these standards will be coming. So bearing that in mind when developing your courses to master's level, to advanced practice, and also that might give you a little bit of flexibility when saying, okay, well, we can do an FCP course and it will be 1 or 2 or 3 of our modules towards advanced practice in skeletal, bearing in mind you've got to get through all of the other things, to the leadership pillar, the research pillar, etc., etc. But they can be implicit within the modules that you develop at the same time. So I think I'll stop there. See if I can stop sharing.
That's really good. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, once Tim stops sharing, that'd be great. So what I think that we'll do is we're going to leave the rest of the questions till the end. So you've got a chance to fill up the chat box. You're all very quiet at them. I can't believe that like over 100 people have got nothing to say from an HEI. But what I'm going to do is because of the way that Tim's presented his slides, it moves on really nicely to Paul, who can then put it into context of real life. Thank you, Paul.
Okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, Paul.
I'm just trying to share my screen. Just bear with me. Just give us a shout when you can sort of see.
It's on now. Thank you.
Is that my slideshow you can see?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great stuff. Right. Okay. So my name is Paul Millington, and I'm from the University of Bradford. And along with my colleague Catherine Caris, I lead our First Contact Physiotherapy Practitioner Programme. And we've been asked by Amanda today to discuss our journey to developing and running this new programme, and hopefully allow anyone else who's thinking about providing this training to maybe perhaps learn from some of our successes and some of our challenges. So I want to take you back to where it all started. So this began with a phone call from a clinical colleague of mine who was also a clinical partner who helped us develop the programme, and he sort of rang me and said, "What's Bradford doing about FCP?" To which I said, "We're not really doing anything at the moment." And he basically told me that a few hundred posts had been commissioned locally, and there was potential LWAB funding, so local work advisory board funding of around £250,000 towards the implementation of FCP, and there was no current local training provision for this. So having recently come from clinical practice myself, I could see this role emerging and developing. And so after chatting with my colleague, I decided to take it to my manager, who I spoke to about it, and he was really supportive. And he basically said to me, well, you know, let's have a look at the opportunities, let's look at the risks, and we'll sort of take it from there. So the opportunities were quite clear. It was a unique product in terms of being the first physio-specific FCP program with a named exit award, so it could act as a standalone qualification. There was also funding available through this local workforce and advisory board and through HEE to support FCP implementation. There was also financial assistance to support the practice placement element of the program, which was quite attractive, as we were quite aware that this could be quite difficult to implement. So there was also a local workforce requirement for this training. We could see that these roles were emerging all over the place, and it's very much part of our university outreach strategy to try and engage and consult and support local organisations to help them sort of grow and develop. We already had a reputation locally for delivering sort of MSK M-level training, so it fitted nicely in with our current portfolio, and we wanted to very much develop that portfolio to sort of building towards a national profile towards advanced practice. So we also had to consider all the risks that were associated with doing a new program, and the timescales, as you can imagine, were really tight on the funding availability through the LWAB. And we also had to work closely with our local clinical partners to bid for this particular funding. So we had to consider workloads, and as I'm sure most of you can appreciate, we were quite stretched from a sort of workload perspective. Would we be able to deliver on this in terms of resources and time? We had to also consider navigating the universal approval processes, which, as I'm sure you all recognise, can be quite long, quite labour intensive. We also had to consider all the challenges of developing and delivering new provision in terms of academic infrastructure, setting up the virtual learning environments, all the applications, the enrolments, and all the inductions, etc. Okay, so our next step was our journey. So we started by engaging in consulting. We had a considerable buy-in from local and multiple stakeholders who both NHS, private, and through GPs and business managers. We also had clinical managers who wanted to get involved, and there's quite a lot of enthusiasm for the project amongst local stakeholders. And they were quite supportive of the product in terms of the context of the revised DES, or the Directed Enhanced Services, where money was available to support these emerging roles. It was very much on their agenda, and they took a very sort of collaborative, can-do approach. Let's work together. And as the stakeholders had key influence into developing the programme, there was considerable buy-in from them, which was instrumental actually in getting us to the point where we're at today. There were quite a lot of things that came out of our engagement event. There was also a really clear voice that there should be a mentored in-practice experience as part of the programme. So we had to get to the design phase. The documents we had available to us at the time were the MSK Core Capability Framework, which was the only thing that we could actually go off there at that particular point in time. We also had access to the CSP job descriptions and the CSP framework for supporting first contact MSK practice. We're also aware of the e-learning packages that have been put together by HEE, the e-learning suite of MSK modules in primary care, and we could see that this was really excellent provision that we wanted to take advantage of. So we wrote it in quite close consultation with Amanda Hensman-Crook and Neil Langridge, who also acted as our external expert for this particular programme. And they were really supportive all the way through, and they kept us honest and kept us on track about what our programme sort of needed to include. So we had to go through the approval processes, and as you can imagine, they're quite long and arduous. So phase one was all about the feasibility, the financial feasibility of the programme. And the second phase, which is the sort of scrutiny from a QA perspective and the governance around that. And we also had to appear at various university approval panels, which they kind of held us to account about whether this was a sustainable, was there going to be enough call for this? Was it going to last going into the future? Because they didn't want to plow lots of money into it if they didn't feel like it was going to fly. So we also had funding, so we managed to get some funding through our local workforce and advisory board, which ultimately came from HEE. And we worked quite closely with our ICS partnership, and they've been really great all the way through, helping us along with our funding. We had to recruit, and that was another benefit of having our local clinical partners involved, because they were very much starting to consider who they might start thinking about sending on the programme. And it was very much on a sort of fair share capacity based on the number of PCNs that were local to us. So we had quite a large number of students who came from various places around the region. So we had to consider our admissions requirements, and we had quite a wide entry gate. So we were working, these were people who were already in FCP roles, who were thinking about going into FCP roles. We had to consider level 7 or equivalence, and there's that word equivalence. We're not quite sure what that necessarily is, but obviously if someone had a lot of practice experience, then that was good enough for us to get onto the programme. We are monitoring and reviewing our entry requirements, but obviously HCPC registration is definitely a must-do for this particular programme. And then getting towards the delivery and the infrastructure, we had to get all the timetabling together, we had to get the virtual learning environment together, and we sort of had to plan our assessments as well. So the modules, so we went for a 60 credit exit award, which featured 2 particular 30 credit modules. So the first module was around specific MSK skills in primary care to encompass that extended scope of the FCP role, and also to reflect all the MSK core capabilities, which was the document we were using at the time to inform our curriculum. So then we also have the second 30 credit module, which is our FCP2, which is working in primary care. And this was originally written for MSK physios, but had the potential to be translated to a multi-professional group, such as paramedics or pharmacists, generally just to meet the requirements of local primary care provision. And it was also part of the DES and also the long-term NHS plan. So let's talk a little bit about how the first module was, the talk content was put together. So from our consultation event, the documents we had read and from the discussions with our clinical partners, we kind of arrived at a themed approach. So we had 5 talk days. The first day was very much induction, an introduction to the program and university, as well as to the VLE, the university systems, eVision. And the second part of the day was spent introducing primary care, which was delivered by one of our local primary care stakeholders, which evaluated extremely well, actually, given the fact that he could provide that overview of what primary care was, PCNs, and students quite liked that context. So the other theme days were featured around the main components of an FCP assessment, so which was basically to screen for serious pathology and history taking, to investigate where appropriate, to be able to interpret those investigations, and to manage the patient in a very sort of patient-centered approach to encompass all the wider aspects of the patient care, not just related to MSK. So this gave the talk content an appropriate flow and the building of ideas and concepts. So teaching was brought in at significant cost and was woven into our pricing structure. And from our other PG provision, we kind of understood the importance of having expert credible tutors, which does come at significant cost, because we needed to buy in those primary care skills, because that wasn't available in our team, in our existing team. And we also felt it was really important for the program to be delivered by primary care practitioners. Okay, so on to assessment. So for the first module, there was 2 forms of assessment. So the first part of the assessment was the MSK Primary Care e-learning for Health package, which was the 8 modules from e-learning for Health. And this was a pass-fail component, because we wanted to ensure that everybody had completed these before that they went on to the next module. And this was to ensure that basically stage 1 of the roadmap had been acknowledged, albeit retrospectively for some people, and it should be undertaken definitely before you enter in primary care. So the second of our modules was the OSCE, so the Objective Structured Clinical Examination, which was an hour long, and this carried 100% of the module weighting parts to assess each of the 4 themes across 2 different scenarios, and this was to allow students to have the opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge. We sort of ran those recently, and we're really pleased actually with how the exam looked in terms of timings, how it ran. It felt balanced and gave the students a really good opportunity to succeed. So the feedback was really overwhelmingly positive, but we have had some take-home points about using expert models, which would probably have been better to ensure that they had a better understanding of the conditions, of the scenarios, because initially we had used a mixture of both expert and student models, and I think going forwards we would definitely look at recruiting expert clinical staff for our OSCE going forwards. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Catherine Caris, who is going to take you through our next steps.
Okay, afternoon all. A quick shift of chairs. So our next steps are sort of multi-pronged approach, really. We're looking, obviously we've completed FCP1 now following COVID interruption. So we are about to evaluate that first module in terms of the student experience. The evaluation will partly be with Health Education England and partly with the local managers. And this is looking at sustained funding going forwards, which we have had assured now for our second cohort. We also want to look at the student journey and thinking about the CSP, their evaluation of FCP and the integration of the role into practice. So we're wanting to grow our provision. So like Richard and Tim talked about earlier, we need to think about FCP outside of our MSK provision and start to think about multi-professional delivery of FCP, an expansion of the model that we're looking at, which is deemed to be good practice. So we're wanting to work towards HE accreditation for the with the Centre for Advancing Practice, and and we're looking at making sure that or ensuring that our students or our trainees are have completed their knowledge, their KSA, so stage 1 and stage 2, so that they can go directly on and to be included into that directory. Our postgraduate provision here at Bradford has really focused on level 7 musculoskeletal skills modules, so looking at spinal, upper limb and lower limb dysfunction modules. So we're wanting really to build a more integrated route to make sure that we are fully implementing the roadmap, so that the students will progress through from those clinical skills through to advancing practice, and picking up those aspects of the 4 pillars that are lacking in terms of our clinical modules currently. So what now? So we've said that we want to collate the feedback and acknowledge our experience from the development of FCP1 module. The roadmap for us has landed at exactly the right time, because although we've had our FCP2 working in primary care module approved, I'm sure you can imagine when you're delivering a new program, very little has happened in terms of developing that module. This module includes 5 days on campus and 75 hours of supported practice out in primary care with a GP clinical mentor. So we appreciate that there's going to be a huge amount of work in terms of getting our documents ready, in terms of looking at our portfolio, building the portfolio, but very much the roadmap is going to be instrumental in incorporating our document that's fit for purpose out in FCP land. So the clinical mentors are going to be GPs. The placement's going to be in a training hub. We are working with a local primary care network who have a placement unit. So they will be collating and allocating placements for the students. We will be supporting the students out on their 75 hours practice placement, and they will be working with documents. So the SEPs and COTS in the roadmap will be incorporated into their portfolio. So in terms of our experience as a HEI, we haven't traditionally placed our postgraduate students on a placement that's supported and developed by the university. So we really need to think about our governance procedures with regards to those placements. So there is some requirement perhaps for the traditional undergraduate mandatory practice requirements, and these may well be different for each primary care network. So thinking about the IRMA training and documentation, thinking about inoculations, etc. So we've currently asked the students to make sure that they can provide this information if it's asked for. We've met some challenges along the way in terms of the placement. We're having queries from managers about the necessity for placement, because we're well aware that certainly locally contracts within primary care networks have now been confirmed, and so clinics need to be covered, and with the number of first contact practitioner trainees that we've taken on, then it may be difficult to meet those contracting needs. Our first intake was 20 funded students, and our second intake will be 15. That will give us a little bit of scope for taking privately funded candidates. So our closing thoughts really is that we absolutely could not have done this development if we'd tried to work in isolation. There's so much going on with regards to advancing practice and primary care developments, that collaborative development, those collaborative partners were absolutely crucial, both in development and implementation. So we worked very closely with HEE, primary care network managers and employers. And so I would advise anybody who's trying to get a program up and running to make sure that they consult far and wide. And I think certainly for us, which was very, very beneficial, that there was definitely a can-do attitude around. So the university processes from Paul said his initial conversation to actually getting students in the classroom actually took us 6 months. So that was writing the documentation, approval of documentation, consulting widely, the recruitment processes. So actually the HEI processes can shift fairly quickly when they're needed to. We will be seeking and working towards HEE accreditation as we get those documents and as we work as we align with the Centre for Advancing Practice and implement the roadmap more fully. The other thing is to publish widely. Events like these, the webinar is absolutely critical in terms of knowledge exchange and getting people's messages out there. Certainly Paul and I have engaged very widely with social media, and we've learnt a lot about what's going on in terms of advancing practice and developing those first contact practitioner roles from social media. And certainly during lockdown, we've engaged in an awful lot of webinars, etc. So do get your message out there, build your evaluation into at the design stage and including the stakeholders, and we will be working with HEE to evaluate the programme. Some of the feedback from FCP1, from student comments. I think the other take-home message for us is that the input from experienced GPs is absolutely critical in terms of a working knowledge and implementing skills. They're certainly evaluated extremely well from the students, and I don't think that we would have delivered the quality product, and it would not have been received as well if we hadn't had those GPs involved. Yes, it costs, and it's fairly heavy on the funding commitments, but it is well worth it in terms of producing a quality product that is appreciated by the students. One of the comments about the examination is that they perhaps wanted the GPs in the exam, and that is something that we will look at. Paul mentioned that we would consider the use of more expert models, and we would potentially draw from our service user and carer group that's integrated into the Faculty of Health here. And that's all I want to say, really. I think we've probably run out of time.
You have, but it was well worth it. I tell you, that was absolutely fantastic presentation. Thank you both. And
thank you so much. And
I'm sure you're going to be absolutely inundated by all the universities across the country pinging into email boxes over the next few weeks. So I'm going to ask you to unshare your slides now, if that's okay. And I'd like to welcome Susan May from Plymouth, who are in the process of developing the module at the moment, but they're not doing it in the same way as Bradford, which is good because it's really healthy to have lots of different ways of doing things. So I'm going to hand you over to Susan now, so she can tell you what's going on down south.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks for Paul. That was great to kind of hear a bit more about Bradford as well. And I know that we've spoken anyway, which is great. So my name's Sue May. I'm one of the pathway leads for our advanced professional practice masters that we run. And so I'm just to talk through, like Amanda said, sort of where we are with developing our first contact practitioner, MSK, primary care route, and where we're sort of hoping to go, really. And I've just been looking at the chat box, so quite a lot of those questions that you had were questions that I've had and have been sort of working through, trying to get my head around a roadmap and all the frameworks. So it's great to have so many people together, and we can really sort of, I think, work out quite a few of these questions that we have, which I think would be really useful. So my background is that I'm the pathway lead for a couple of our MSc Advanced Professional Practice pathways. Probably, I'm sure, like most of you, I do lots of other things as well. So I teach on the undergrad programme. I'm also part of our placement team. And the reason I kind of just wanted to mention that is it's a bit like Paul was saying earlier, and Keris, that with us developing our first contact practitioner kind of route or module initially, that was kind of came about because I started to have these conversations with people. So we were already delivering the one of our modules, this advanced clinical reasoning in musculoskeletal conditions. So we were delivering this as postgraduate module. I was out in practice, being part of the placement team for the undergraduate. We had a working party looking at apprenticeship route for physiotherapy. So, and what happened was we started to get lots of conversation around first contact practitioners, and so that started to snowball. It's a bit of the like happens often, really, doesn't it, within HEIs, that once you put your head above the parapet and kind of actually show an interest in something, then you seem to get contacted by lots of different people, which was great because, again, that meant that I got contacted by lots of different FCPs who were actually already in that role. Some people that were hoping to get into that role. And I think what it really reflects is what an exciting time it is for us as a profession with these emerging roles, and really how key we are as HEIs, how well positioned we are to support clinicians going into these roles as well. So when I was developing the FCP module, as sort of been said before, what was key for us was this engagement with these key stakeholders. So I started having regular meetings with FCPs in practice, with managers, so I could really understand from the perspective of those out already in the FCP role, from the perspective of the managers. We could kind of understand from all the different frameworks that are out there what actually we needed to deliver. And I remember at one point doing a wish list for everybody from an FCP point of view, which was really useful to actually see. And there was, as you would imagine, that was really useful because actually there was therefore a lot of agreement between people with what they actually wanted as part of their FCP module. I think what was really interesting, and for me, that's what's been so useful about working with the roadmap and with Health Education England, is I think all these frameworks that Tim was talking about as well, it's really helped to get much more alignment, because at initial conversations that I was having with different clinicians and managers, is sometimes people were saying, but we're all FCPs, we're all already frontline sort of practitioners because we take, self-referral, we work in GP surgeries already. And I think what's been really helpful is now I think we've got some absolute clarity on what a first contact practitioner is, how that fits with advanced practice, and how we can support them as HEIs. And again, as we sort of highlighted, really, from our perspective as HEIs, we've got real advantages here because we're already used to delivering at master's level our teaching and learning. We're already used to that process of working within frameworks. So probably most of us, when the FCP roadmap, MSK roadmap did come out, was published, in October, we, were already sort of ready for that and already sort of aligned because we, knew about all the different components of it. And I think also most of us now we're used to developing new pathways, aren't we? And I think this reflects the diversity now within our undergraduate portfolios. So most of us now are going to have MPhysio, pre-reg Masters, Physio, alongside our BSc. So alongside our normal kind of bachelor degree. So I think that makes us absolutely ready to take on these sort of challenges of moving forwards. So we were working on this module, and like with most of us, then COVID hit, which meant that actually we would have delivered it. It kind of maybe was timely, but actually it didn't happen because then the roadmap came out. So from my perspective, what happened when the FCP roadmap came out was that it really helped to clarify the sort of the role of the first contact practitioner in MSK in primary care, so sort of the expectations, the process. When we looked at it, there was really clear alignment with our modules. So what we're looking at is we deliver modules that are 20 credit modules, and mostly those modules would be 4 taught days that a student attends for. And we already had the Advanced Clinical Reasoning in MSK Conditions module, which fitted really nicely then with tailoring, and with then having the FCP module. So I was already looking at those two as sort of fitting well together. When the roadmap landed, I think the big change for us was the fact that we needed to rethink where we were going, because so we had this FCP module, but clearly what the roadmap was talking about was the stages, was about, you know, understanding that speciality sort of knowledge, so the knowledge, skills and attributes for stage 1, and then really looking at building into the capability and practice and signing off of that in stage 2. So that meant that we really needed to kind of think about what we were doing. And I think for us, what happened with that was that the sort of process became slightly different, and I realised that actually one first contact practitioner, you know, in brackets MSK within primary care module, was not going to be enough to really align well with the stage 1 and with the stage 2. And I think that, you know, looking at the sort of questions that have come up, that's probably a similar process to you all, that a lot of you are in as well, is kind of thinking, how do we align our module with what we need to deliver? And also the other thing that I thought was really useful, because actually I had just had a conversation with some clinicians around this last week, was the pillars, the 4 pillars. And actually we were discussing that, and I was talking more about the elements of the pillars rather than just the 4 pillars being really, really separate, because actually you can pick out amongst a lot of the different modules that we're delivering different elements. And for us as HEIs, the research element is obviously fairly straightforward as well to deliver on. So I have got one request, which I know Amanda's heard from me before, and that in the roadmap, the fact that one of the diagrams which states about a FCP module will then lead through those sort of full routes. And I just wondered if we could use the term HEI route, because we are all going to deliver probably in a slightly different way. But if we just put in like FCP module, there's an expectation, I think, from those looking to pick up on our modules, that what that means is they just need to do one module and then they'll be signed off for stage 1 and stage 2. So it's just, maybe that would be helpful. So what we're looking at is we're looking to basically take our FCPs through stage 1 and stage 2. So we've got clear sign off at the moment for stage 1 with our 2 modules. And obviously then what we'd like to do is take them onto the FCP directory. We know that time frame, and again this might come up in the questions as well, is that from April 21 that we want clinicians to be, you know, sort of engaged and starting on these different routes, and then it's for sign off, isn't it, by April 2022 for those. So I think what I'm picking up on is there's a bit of flexibility, isn't there, at the moment, because what we're doing is we're right at the beginning of this journey, and so there will be some students that will take more of a blended approach to the route. And like everybody else, and I'm sure like all of you, what we're doing is we're working towards the stage 3. So we want to be able to sign off for an MSc, an advanced practice and we feel that's kind of quite an important thing for us to be working towards as well. So for the future, so our opportunities and challenges. So again, we're very mindful that currently the demand is out there from these established first contact practitioners that are looking to gain entry onto the register, and so they want some clarity on how they're able to do that. And so I'm having lots of conversations with different FCPs about how we can support them with that. And I was really I thought that was really useful to get the reinforcement from Richard and Tim, that actually it can be that they may well choose to take 1 or 2 modules and then go down the portfolio route, because I can see for a lot of the established FCPs, that's the way that they would want to go. They're already out there working in practice and have got close relationships. For us, again, it's about their sustainability, as it would be for any of you when you're delivering. When you have to go back to your HEIs and be able to justify, to be able to sit there in front of a team of people and justify the delivery for your modules. And so we're being very aware of that change in demographics, as less experienced clinicians will be looking to move into the FCP role, which is why what we're looking to do is that kind of sign off on stage 1. And then we're looking to develop a placement module for sign off on stage 2, so that we can actually provide the whole sign off for stage 1 and 2. But at the moment, what we're looking at is a blended approach, so that the HEI modules that the students and clinicians can take will then contribute towards their portfolio, and they can go for the portfolio route. So it's about working, isn't it, together to support the best route for these clinicians onto the register, really. I think a really important thing for us, and I'm glad that this has came up, is about the role and the support of the supervisors and for clarifying sign-off and how that's going to work. And that's something that we're really working on at the moment and in discussion with our stakeholders as well. And for the future, what's really key is evaluating the role of the first contact practitioners. And I know this is happening at a lot of different levels, really understanding the different perspectives, the relationship between clinicians, between their workplace, because some FCPs are working as part of a trust and then going out and doing their FCP role. Some clinicians are employed by the PCNs and working solely with a GP surgery. So it's really working with all those different stakeholders, and then also kind of ourselves as HEIs and HEE, kind of just making sure we've got that real sort of understanding between us all, and really think about the development of the role in the future. And I think there's just one more thing I was going to say. Oh, for us, we've been looking at our prerequisites, and for coming on to the FCP module, we're looking at the sign off of those e-learning modules because they're so integral as well to kind of have. So thank you. That's me, Amanda. So I'm going to hand back to you. Thanks very much.
That's great. Do you mind stop this screen share, please? Thank you very much indeed, Susan. Again, an absolutely fantastic presentation, and I'm absolutely indebted to both Bradford University and Plymouth University for the hard work that you've been doing. I'm sure that was very useful to everybody on the call, because there's nothing like bringing it to life in real time, talking to people that actually know what it's like to be in the university delivering things. There's an awful lot of things to do. I'm going to just do a couple of questions because I'm aware of the time, that we've only got 5 minutes left, and I'd like to be able to finish on time today and put together Q&As for that. But what I'd really like to do is in the chat box, I asked Jill Rawlinson if she wouldn't mind answering a question, because Jill set off the very first contact module. It feels like decades ago now, but it was probably only about 2 or 3 years ago, wasn't it, Jill? And but there's been a lot of learning from. There's a question in particular about setting up a multi-professional module rather than profession specific, and I think it'd be really helpful if Jill would maybe outline lessons learned from UCLan, if that's possible. Do you mind, Jill?
No, not at all. Just to say, I don't work at UCLan anymore. I'm at the CSP, and I do acknowledge that Ken and Kurt, who are leading the UCLan module, are on the call. and might have a view. But I think this is $1 million question about, so the module that was commissioned from the Northwest HE, I think Naomi's on the call, was commissioned as a multi-professional module, 30 credits. And there were some significant challenges. We had a majority of physiotherapists, and many of whom, in hindsight, and remember, because the module's free as well, it tends to, people want to come on it because there's free funded places, and they sort of met the criteria, but lots of those were actually looking for MSK skills, when really the module had been set up to be more about how to work in primary care, how to manage risk, how to think more about the whole person, bringing in mental health, a lot more population health, and wasn't really geared up to teach MSK skills. And it's interesting to see there how Paul sort of split that into two, because I think they are two different things. And I think there's a lot to be gained from having a multi-professional approach. We had a paediatric dietitian, which we had paramedics, but it was quite hard for them because it tended to be dominated by physios, and they tended to want to keep bringing it back to MSK red flags rather than thinking, for example, about red flags in a broader sense. So I'm not saying I've got the answer. I just think it's something we need to be really mindful of, because I think we need to move out of our own silos if we're moving into primary care. But I think we need to ensure that it doesn't get dominant. If it's not MSK, then people are really clear about what the module is or it isn't. And I personally do think that separating them out into an MSK component and more about how to work in primary care is potentially the way forward. But again, it's going to take some working through with both the stage 1 and 2 sign-off.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Jill. Thank you. And that's really helpful. Thank you. I think sometimes it's just really helpful to hear sort of from experience, as well as what's going on now and what's happening in the present moment. So from a national perspective, which might answer some of the questions that are in the box, the reason why we're asking for stage 1 and stage 2 within an HEI module is because the system's already completely overwhelmed with all these new roles moving in. And of course, there is consideration for all 5 new roles coming into primary care, and of course we need to develop FCP modules that are going to accommodate for all of them moving in. For many of you, you'll know that there's a paramedic tender that has already gone out to the HIs to develop paramedic FCP modules, and there is a typo on it. It should say 30 credits minimum, not 20, just saying. Sorry, thank you. Seeing your face, Jules, just reminded me. We had that conversation the other day. And there's about an MSK tender's about to go out over the next week as well, to develop FCP modules. So there is some funding coming in for those 2 areas of practice. And of course, as the other knowledge, skills and attributes documents are released for the other 3 professions, then it will make it a lot easier to develop modules to accommodate podiatrists, OTs and dietitians that are moving into this world, into the primary care world. And I think the important things to think about is that there is a generic core amongst the knowledge, skills and attributes document that could be taught multi-professionally. And I know I've had conversations with Paul and Susan about this. So using that, and then maybe thinking of a way where you can utilise the superpowers of the other professionals, where they're taught separately, but coming back to the multi-professional group, or they're using their learning, individual learning, to triangulate evidence against a domain, for example. So there is a number of different ways doing it. So we are actually asking for stage 1 and 2 for HIs to do that, and the reason for that is because primary care is going to be completely overwhelmed if everybody has to do a portfolio route in primary care. We're just not going to be able to find the capacities to do that. So we're asking the HEIs to be able to help us out with that. How it's done is entirely up to you. It doesn't matter. I think Susan had a great idea. We had a conversation about whereby you've got the taught module in there, and then they go off and they do their stage 2 in primary care, but the university might mark that. There's an awful lot of thought to do that, but I think that the biggest ask, and in terms of accreditation, is that if you are developing FCP modules, that they're developed making sure that they are cross-referenced to the knowledge, skills and attributes document, and they include the 2 sets of e-learning modules that I've put in the chat box. So that is the primary care specific 80 e-learning modules that say MSK on them, but actually they're generic. So that's relevant to all professions. And there's the 3 personalised care e-learning modules that they do. And I know that in Bradford, they put them as pre-course learning. So they don't have to be inside the course. They can be used as homework before they come in the course or whilst they're during the course. So it's just food for thought. Please keep your questions coming, and I will leave this open for all. If you want to put some more things in the chat box, we will put a Q&A document together. And of course, you can always contact myself at Health Education England with any views, comments, questions, and that will help put together a Q&A document that we'll get back out for you. So I'd like to thank you all. And our presenters, actually, I'd like to thank our presenters really very, very much for coming today. It was a brave thing in such a big webinar, and I know that it was the first time that Paul has ever presented, and he did an absolutely fantastic job, as I'm sure you'll all agree with me. So I'm really grateful for all of your interest and really look forward to working with you all moving forward. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.